Here's a fact that may surprise you. Most retirees don't run out of money in retirement. In fact, the opposite usually happens. They usually end up with more. Research from BlackRock found that after nearly 20 years in retirement, most retirees still had 80% of their savings left. This isn't just theory, I see it here in Ireland too. A retired couple I recently met with from Galway started out with €1 million. 20 years later, after drawing down a steady income every single year, they now have 1.2 million. So the question is, why does this happen? Why do so many retirees actually get wealthier after they stop working? And why don't they spend the money they've worked so hard for? Stick with me, because the paradox explains one of the biggest retirement planning mistakes that I see in Ireland today. I'm going to show you how to avoid it. The answer starts with something called a consumption gap. Simply put, retirees spend far less than the theory suggests, even when they can afford to spend more. The famous 4% rule? In 2/3 of cases, retirees ended up with doubling their starting wealth. Some even ended up with 5 times more. BlackRock found only 1 in 4 retirees expected to fully spend their savings. Most left it untouched. And here in Ireland, the CSO data shows us that household spending drops by nearly 25% after retirement, even though income doesn't fall by nearly as much. So here's the paradox. People are spending less in retirement, but living longer. The average Irish man lives to about 80, the average woman to about 84, but many live well into their 90s. That's 2 decades or more of retirement, yet spending falls sharply even in those healthy years. Well, why? Because we're trained to fear overspending, to believe the real danger is running out of money. But here's the twist. What if the real risk isn't spending too much? What if the real risk is spending too little? Michael Kitces puts it perfectly. 100% probability of success in retirement means 100% probability of underspending. Remember that couple from Galway? When I asked why they hadn't spent more, their answer was simple. Kevin, I can't bring myself to spend. I've been saving for over 50 years. It feels wrong to stop now. That is the heart of the problem. We spend a lifetime saving, but we never learn to spend. And the result? Many retirees die with far more money than they started with, and far fewer experiences than they could have had. So let's make this real with an Irish example. Let me introduce you to Barry and Fiona Murphy, who are 64. They're about to retire and they have €1 million in pension assets. Like many couples, they have run the numbers and they believe they'll need about €55,000 a year in retirement. Even with a pot of about €1 million, they worry, what if we run out of money? So they play it safe. They take their modest tax-free lump sum, and now here's the key part. At age 66, they will both qualify for the Irish state pension. That is over €30,000 a year, guaranteed for life, which means much of their core spending is already covered before they begin to touch their retirement assets. So let's run through their plan. They spend €55,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, and they've assumed a very conservative life expectancy of 90. Guess what happens when they reach 90? They will finish with €2.7 million in combined pension and invested assets. They've lived a very good life, and their €1 million pot has growing nearly threefold. But let's look at a more common spending pattern. Even though they plan to spend 55, in reality they only spend €35,000 a year. Old habits of saving are hard to break. With the state pension covering most of their basics, their withdrawals stay very small. They invest cautiously in a fund that grows, say, 6% net of fees, and any surplus income they reinvest. Now look at the outcome. That same €1 million grows to €3.6 million by age of 90. This is the paradox of retirement. Even while spending, many Irish retirees end up wealthier than when they started. This effect is even stronger here in Ireland. So let's break it down why. The first reason is the state pension. Right now, it pays about €15,000 per year per person, or close to $30,000 for a couple. It's inflation linked. That's a guaranteed income stream, very much like an annuity. Second is housing. Most Irish retirees today own their home outright. No rent, no mortgage. That removes one of the biggest costs to most retirees. Another reason why I really sympathize with those who are struggling to get on the property ladder today. The third is taxes. Once you retire, your income usually drops. You also get the age-related tax credits. You won't pay PRSI after 66, and ARF withdrawals are often taxed more lightly than mid to late career PAYE income. The fourth is healthcare. Unlike the US, retirees aren't paying $1,000 a month in private premiums. You have the HSE system, plus subsidies and medical cards that kick in later in life. So why don't people spend even when the math shows that they can? Well, it's not finance, it's psychology. We spend 30, 40, 50 years in accumulation mode, saving, delaying gratification, watching every single euro. By the time we retire, that habit is baked in. BlackRock call this the accumulation mindset. Retirees are stuck in save, save, save mode, and it shows up in the numbers. Fewer than 20% of retirees set goals to actually spend on their assets. More than half want to grow their retirement savings, even though they're never going to spend it. And then there's the fear of markets, fear of inflation, fear of living too long, and the fear of running out of money. Think about this. In one study from Morningstar, it found that retirees with a defined benefit or annuity retirement plan were far more willing to spend because the income felt guaranteed. But those relying on savings and their own accounts, like a defined contribution, they spent far less. This comes down to the psychology of loss aversion. Psychologists say losing €100 feels about twice as painful as the joy of winning €100. So every withdrawal in retirement feels like a loss, even when the portfolio is designed to last. When you're working, overspending is no big deal. You can make it up with your next paycheck. But in retirement, every euro comes from your own pocket and feels permanent. So let me give you an example. I work with a couple who had more than €600,000 in their retirement pot. They debated for weeks about whether they could afford a €5,000 holiday with their grandkids. The math said yes, the psychology said no. But sometimes the advice makes it worse. You'll hear supposed financial gurus saying, spend only 2% in retirement or only spend your pension growth rate. This type of bad advice leaves people paralyzed. The default in retirement is to underlive your potential just to feel secure. The cost of underspending isn't just financial, it's the opportunity or the life cost. When you spend less than you could, you miss out on experiences. You skip the family holiday, you put off that home renovation, and you say no to helping your kids or grandchildren. Here's the tragedy. The window to do those things eventually closes. I recently met with retirees who told me that they wanted to take a trip when it feels safer, when the market feels more secure, when inflation drops. But when is safer? By the time the safer comes around, their health will have declined. One couple I worked with had a dream of visiting their family in Australia. They waited until their late 70s. By then, long-haul travel was essentially impossible. That window had closed. But here's the counterexample. Another client that I had didn't wait. They took the trip to Australia the minute they retired. A decade later, one of them faced a serious health issue. Travel became difficult, but they had no regrets because they had the memories that they had already made. Remember that BlackRock survey? It found that only 1 in 6 retirees plan to front-load their spending. Most aim to spend it consistently. But life isn't consistent. It is not a straight line. The real risk isn't overspending. It's missing the window to live fully while you can. Money can grow back, but time cannot. So how do you replace fear with confidence? The answer is to use dynamic spending strategies. Think of it like setting guardrails. When markets do well, you can allow yourself to spend more. When markets stumble, you just trim back a little. Not a drastic change. It could be the difference between €500 or €600 a month after a big market drop. It's like a thermostat. When it gets too hot, the air conditioning goes on. When it gets too cold, the heat kicks in. Your retirement income plan should work pretty similar. Spend more when risk is low, tighten up slightly when the risk gets higher. Guardrails are about balance, they're not for perfection. You can combine this with something like the bucket strategy. So for your immediate needs, 1 to 3 years, you keep it in cash. For your medium needs, you keep it in, say, bonds for stability. And then for your long-term needs, you enable it to grow in assets for the future. That way, your spending doesn't depend on how the stock market performs. You have your cash set aside and you can ride out the bumps in the market. And here's an Irish twist. If you have an ARF, the government already forces you to draw down a minimum each year. You have to take income out whether you want to or not. That's a system nudging you to spend. Now, let me show you a quick example. Here, with €1 million in retirement savings, they want to draw down $40,000 per year adjusted with inflation. Watch what happens when we run this scenario. Even with recessions and inflation spikes built in, they still end up with more than €1.5 million at 90. But here's the key thing. When the markets drop, the system doesn't just say you failed. It simply says you need to reduce your spending by, say, $500 a month until things recover. That's manageable. That's the guardrail approach in action. Now, you may be wondering, but Kevin, what if the markets never recover? And that is a fair question. Here's the truth though. Markets have always recovered. Even after wars, market crashes, pandemics. But let's assume the worst. Even then, dynamic planning means you adjust gradually. You don't suddenly slash your lifestyle, you cut a little, you rebalance, and you reevaluate every single year. It's not a catastrophe, it's controlled, and that's what gives you the confidence to spend today while keeping a safety net for tomorrow. My approach is that money should enable life, not the other way. Life isn't linear, therefore your spending shouldn't be linear either. In the early years of retirement, they are your exploring years. Spending is higher because you're engaged in travel, activities, and big experiences. Then comes the nesting years. You're still healthy, but routine settles in, travel slows down. And then in the later years, it's the reflecting years. Healthcare and support costs rise. Most people naturally follow this curve, but very few people plan for it. So let me give an example. I had a client who bought a camper van in their first year of retirement. For 5 summers, they toured all across Europe, France, Spain, Portugal. Those were their exploring years. But by their mid-70s, they'd sold the camper van as they were staying closer to home. That was them entering their nesting stage. Now, they're in their mid-80s, more of the budget goes towards healthcare and support. They're now in their reflecting stage. That is a smart move to front-load their experiences. Go to Australia, get the camper van, make those memories, because you don't always have the health or energy to do it later. At the end of the day, retirement isn't just about math and money, it's about meaning. So ask yourself this: what is money really for? Is it for family support, travel, giving back, freedom to choose how you spend your time? Because the most valuable asset in retirement isn't your portfolio, it's the life you want to live in the time that you have left. I always remind clients, money is just a tool. The real goal is freedom, purpose, and memories. So let me ask you directly, what's the one thing you'd regret not doing today? Most retirees end up with more money than they started with. In Ireland, with a state pension, mortgage-free homes, and lower costs, that's even more likely. The real risk isn't overspending, it's underliving. You've worked hard to save. Now, give yourself permission to spend, to enjoy life on experiences. If you'd like a personalized retirement income plan that shows you exactly how much you could afford to spend with confidence, book a free discovery call with me. The link is in the description below. And if you're still in the building phase and want to see how to create a €1 million retirement plan from scratch, watch the next video that I've linked right here. Because the best retirement plan isn't just about the numbers, it's about living the life that you want.